Very short Bible reading this morning, Matthew 5:13, the bit of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "You are like salt for the whole human race, but if salt loses its saltiness, there is no way to make it salty again. It has become worthless, so it is thrown out, and people trample on it. You are like light for the whole world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. Instead, he puts it on a lampstand, where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, your light must shine before people, so that they will see the good things you do and praise your Father in heaven." I want to finish this series we've been doing this summer in terms of thinking about Jesus, looking at Jesus' life and aiming to imitate what Jesus said, rather than just looking at the commandments in the Bible, thinking, well, how does that work out in practice? And the best way to see the way it works out in practice is to see the way that Jesus worked it through. And I just want to share with you this morning another observation of Jesus. Remember, we were doing last week, those of you here, about Jesus exercised power. You know, in authority, in what he said, in miracles and all sorts of things. And we need to try to do that. We said that if you didn't exercise any power, lots of what Jesus did dropped out completely. But I want to share with you the thought that a vast percentage of what Jesus said was some kind of parable, a metaphor, a simile, a story, one thing that he told that made a point about something else. You are the salt of the earth. It's not about salt. It's about people. You are the light of the world. It's not about light. It's about people. And all those, you know, whether it's just a quick burst, just like a metaphor there, a picture of one thing standing for another thing, or whether it's a full-blown story like the Good Samaritan or the parable of the sower. It's one thing being told to make something else, well, what? To make it clear? Oh, yeah. To make it memorable, you remember all the stories. But also to give you a challenge. You know, Jesus often said a little parable and then went home, and they all went home thinking, what did that mean? Rather than just spelling it all out, sort of thing. Now we all use metaphor all the time, don't we? You know, if you go home and you say something like, I don't know about that sermon on Sunday, it was a dead loss. That is a metaphor. It wasn't lost and it wasn't dead in the sense of, you know, the crematorium. But we use that as a sort of set. It seems to be more interesting than saying, I thought that sermon lacked content and impact and was not didactically helpful. It's better to say it was a dead loss. We know where we were then, don't you? Yeah. Tell me. Take us 2 short planks. You know? Yeah. That's right. Turning over a new leaf. Lame duck president, lame duck politician of some sort, you know. And you see it goes on and on and on. You know, the stock market crashes. You can't hear it crash, but we want to say it crashes. Inflation is ballooning. What is it ballooning? You know, it goes on and on and on. We're always using some little metaphor. I used to have a lovely metaphor. I used to know that people used to say that somebody was as useful as a chocolate fire guard. Oh, that was very good. That's it. You've got it. When you take it home, you can see it. You know, not saying this person lacked effectiveness, sort of thing. And so, I want to encourage you to this morning to think what you haven't perhaps thought before. To think, if Jesus uses metaphor and parable in what he tries to communicate with people, when we are communicating with them, somebody needs encouragement, somebody needs a bit of guidance, somebody's asking for your advice. You know, just back to the coffee and back to the tea, back to the conversation. or somebody is going on about Christianity and you need to defend it in some way, do apologetics, or you get the opportunity to say something about Jesus, would it not be a good thing, rather than just giving them a catechism of the Methodist Church, to give them a little story, a picture, an analogy, a metaphor? Oh, well, it's like this, or like that, or you remember when I was on my holidays, and you know, those little things that you don't have to say, I could never tell the parable of the sower. Don't try it. We're not saying that. It's more a matter of when saying, oh, I feel really depressed. My phone has been cut off all week, you know. And you say when you know you're going to go, well, perhaps we could have a prayer. God is never cut off, is he? And you've got the phone and the phone line and the prayer, and you've just put them together. That makes such a difference. Just that, isn't it? When we look at Jesus's, you know them. I mean, we are overwhelmed by parables and stories. You're spoiled for choice, really, aren't you? You've got the full-blown, you know, as I say, the parable of the sower, the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, a whole range of those big stories, and the short little bursty ones, you know. But each of them is more powerful than what it means, really, isn't it? As I say, you are like the salt of the earth. You know, is that, rather than saying, I think if you might be small, maybe insignificant, but you can make a big difference in the big thing. You are the salt of the earth. It's something to do with saltiness. Is it purity? Is it taste? Is it that sort of sparkle you get from salt? You are the salt of the earth. That is, you go home and think about that, don't you? You don't think, I suppose I could be effective, although I'm small, sort of thing. And when we get to the, say, the parable of the prodigal son, you can feel it, can't you? You can feel he's a bit of a lad when he goes. You say, oh, don't do that. It's letting down his father, got no sympathy for him. You feel that he's having wine, women and song and all that sort of thing. Don't waste it. And he's spent everything, real pathos there. And then you're with him when he's with the pigs. Oh, it's terrible. It's unclean. The pigs are having a better time than he is. But it's all his own fault. But he then says, he comes to himself and he says, you know, I think I'll go back and I might as well be a servant than a slave with these pigs. And he goes back and he's made up his speech. Oh, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no worthy. You know, he's saying it all the way home. He's getting it right. But his father there is looking for him, and his father is watching over, and he's looking out for him. And his father runs to him, and he doesn't let him get halfway through the speech. He embraces him. He has a party. You can feel it. Is that not better than what is true? God is always willing to forgive people who repent. Indeed, heaven delights at it. What really gets to you? What do you really remember? When we get to the Acts of the Apostles and the rest of the New Testament, they use less parables. They really do. That's why you can't remember hardly anything that was said by anybody in the Acts of the Apostles, can you? You can only remember what they did. I mean, Peter's sermons were just what were needed at the time, but they're not exactly memorable, are they? They were very long and quite turgid, like John Wesley's sermons, to be honest. But they were what were needed. But you don't remember it very much. But interestingly, when Philip goes to speak to the Ethiopian eunuch, what does Philip find when he gets the Ethiopian? The Ethiopian is reading Isaiah. And what is he reading from Isaiah? He's reading about sheep. He was led as a sheep to slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearers is silent. What an interesting place to start. And from that text, he led him to Christ. From a metaphor that seems to be about sheep shearing. Because it's strong, because it's a good place to start. You can imagine him talking about the whole sheep business and about sacrifice and all this sort of thing. It's there, isn't it? And when you get to St. Paul, what do you remember about what St. Paul said? You know, even something great like 1 Corinthians 13, you know, it's great. It says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become what? Come on, I have become what? That's it, that's right. A noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Both metaphors. If he said, I'm really not saying very much that's of any significance or something. You remember that. But it really gets to you, doesn't it? I go on remembering these cymbals and gong, and I don't want to be like that. And in my job, you often can be. We remember that when he talks about you are the body of Christ, all that business about all these, in 1 Corinthians 12, there are fingers and there are eyes, and he says, because I am not a hand, I'm not part of the body, or an ear, say to the eye. It's like a sort of a big biology lesson. Every little bit got its place, and bits shouldn't complain they're not another bit, or shouldn't look down on lesser bits. It's anatomy, isn't it? But you can remember it. We are the body of Christ, rather than, well, we all have an interactive role to play within the community, and we have various things to bring to, And the athletics bit, running for the tape, having worked out in the gym. That is so much better than saying we have a degree of focus and we need a degree of persistence. You can see the runner, can't you? It's good stuff. You can remember that. What about if we were to say, and I think it's important that when we are Christians, we need to use the various gifts and fruit of the Spirit that the Lord gives us. So we need this and this and this and this. Come on, let's put on the whole armour of God. You can all remember the whole armour of God. You can see the Roman soldier there with his breastplate and his helmet and his sword and his, all of that stuff. It's all metaphor because we remember it. And it's such a disappointment in a new translation when it said the Holy Spirit produces love, peace, patience, kindness. The fruit of the Spirit. We're immediately there, aren't we? Fruit. And in 1 Peter, when he said Jesus is the cornerstone, but rejected by some and thus thrown in the field, and they fall over it. Well, that's better than saying that Jesus forms a wonderful basis for all that we do. But you can feel it, you can hear it. It's more. That's what I remember from the New Testament first and foremost. It's clear, and we need to be trying that ourselves. You need to try that in a very small way. I want to encourage you this week. Throughout this summer, I've been saying this has to take home value. I'm going to be a preacher for this. But we have conversations, and if you can use the analogy, if you can get a little picture, is it not going to be clearer? Will it make not more impact? Will you not remember it? People have said to me in the past, I remember your story about the so-and-so. Why don't we try it? First of all, you've got to know what you want to say. There is no point having an analogy about something you don't know what you really want to say. It becomes a decoration. All right? You will hear this in my sermons and hopefully more often in other people's sermons. That really, you don't know what they're trying to say, but they told a story. What was that about? And if you don't know what to say, don't say it. Don't produce an illustration of what you don't know. All right? Otherwise, you'll just waffle. If you want to tell somebody a little story about what happened in Causeway Head or what happened on your holidays, just tell them a story. Jesus doesn't, I'm sure Jesus told stories as well that weren't parables. They're not in the Gospels, all right? They were just what I did on so-and-so. But don't waffle, or don't give them that sort of metaphor like, well, all life is a journey. Great, great. So it's just waffle. But don't finish up by saying the wrong thing and then using the wrong metaphor, and it makes it worse. Somebody's very worried. Somebody has died. And they didn't believe. In fact, they were pretty much the other way. And the elderly person is very worried that their loved one is not going to go to heaven. And you think, we need some bit of comfort here. So I drag in a bit of universalism and I think, I say, you don't want to worry. Remember that story about Jesus with the 99 sheep? He did not sit down until he'd got the last one in. So he will not be sitting down in heaven until Uncle Arthur's in. That is all bad. And having the parable in, the wrong parable to say the wrong story just makes it worse. So, avoid that sort of thing. Don't tell the wrong story. Okay. What do you want to say? Just say one thing. A parable is to make one main point. Even if it's a long story, like the story of the wise and the unwise virgins, or the story of the man who goes away and leaves all his tenants in his vineyard. They're long stories, but they only make one point. And if you're going to sort of bend those round into an example, remember, what is the one big thing I want to say? That's not easy for people like me, because if you're going to tell them a little story, because you're used to sermons, people like me bring out all the other things all the way through. So, for instance, you were going to say, so you're talking to somebody who had a low self-esteem, was not really feeling they could contribute much. And you would say, oh, come on. Look at your light there. Look at your table lamp there. It's out there. That's where it needs to be. You need to be contributing what you're going to contribute in. And what a blessing that would be to people if you could do this or this. And you don't want to think badly. But in fact, you're just like that person in the story. He's put a light under the bowl. Jesus told a story. You don't want to put it under the bowl, you see. And then I immediately think, what happens when you put a light under the bowl? It goes out. We all know that in the sermon, but that is not the main point, is it? I even heard a sermon preached, if you put a light under the bed, it catches the bed on fire, which is God punishing you for not doing mission. Well, that's not what it's about. All right? And it's because you've heard different things. Just stick to it, Come on, you could make a contribution, you could do something here, that will be good, But on the other hand, you will find if you tell stories to people, they will often not pick up what you wanted to say. I've often used the illustration of parachuting and saying, if you want somebody wants to step out in faith, I'm ready to go and see my family in, Scotland, but I've never been to Scotland. And you're talking about just a step of faith, that Jesus would help us with a step of faith, And so I give them a parachuting as an example. It's just jumping out the aircraft that's the hard bit. And after that, the parachute opens and the wind holds you up, and Jesus will be with you if you will just make the step, but he will not make that step for you. Just make that little step of faith and you will find the Lord will take you through fine. And the person says, but sometimes the parachute doesn't open, does it? You see, that's about parachuting. It's not about the story. All metaphors have limitations. It's just about one thing, not the wrong thing, not something other thing, and you've got to get them back on track. I know that happens but for Jesus, they know their limitations. Jesus telling the story about the unjust judge. You remember when the woman comes and nags him, and he says he didn't like God or men. But he couldn't be fussed with this woman any longer, and he gave her what. There's lots of things could go wrong in that parable, aren't there? Except just to say, look, why don't you God doesn't answer my prayer, just keep going. Just keep going. Just persevere. Even the worst people, you nag them, well, what is God going to do about it? So, one big thing. And do not think that the one big thing in the story is one thing that stands out. Do not read the parable of the Good Samaritan and think, what is the one thing? So I'm looking for an amazing bit. What is it? It's not that. It's that they all bring it together. You're telling me a story. When I was on holiday this summer in Scarborough, I'm going to tell you a picture about it. I'm going to bring in the bits of the story that make the point. If me eating ice cream is part of the story that's going to be useful, I put it in. If it's not, blow the ice cream, Bring that little, when I was in Causeway Head, I fell over a small dog, sort of thing. You can say, you don't need to say what you don't need to say. In these big parables, it's not what is the magic bit, it's how do they all come together. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's not about the donkey, and it's not about the innkeeper, and it's not about the inn. It's probably not even about the two religious people who didn't come, but they all play their part. If you were standing on top of Holden Moors looking with binoculars at Exeter, somebody could say to you, what can you see? I could say, Exeter. And they say, no, but what can you really see? What's the important thing? And you look, okay, the cathedral. That's not it at all. Just because you don't have to say, I see this house, this office block, this crane, this, and this. I say all those things. It's worth saying, but they all make Exeter. The story comes together. What is this about? Where are we going with this? You may think this at this point in the sermon. Where are we going? I'm telling you this little story. I got this example for you. There's enough detail to make you interested, but not to get lost in the bushes. Huh? And I want to tell you a story. I want to give you an example which is relevant to you. Okay? So a lot of people who don't do electronics, it's no good going on about computers to people who don't have computers. You know, I love talking to young people about the athletics things. You know, we're in training in the gym. Well, that's what we do when we're reading the Bible, sort of thing. It's good. It's relevant to them. Come on. Are we in good shape spiritually, emotionally, as well as physically, or what have you? You know, it's no good sitting on the sofa of life, is it? You know what you're doing. Get up and get on with it, sort of thing. Right? On the other hand, if you've got elderly people who can't do anything but sit on the sofa because they're housebound, find some analogy about knitting or something. Or about never being able to get, what's relevant to them. They might say, I cannot get the council to reply to me, you know. It's a great thing to be able to say, well, God will always reply. God will always reply. It's relevant to them, you know. You've seen these electric bicycles. I think it's rather unfair, really. Personally, I think it's rather unfair. You've got somebody on a bike, you know. I'm running up the hill and it's suddenly, this bike goes by, it's got this little thing in it, isn't it? You seen it? Yeah. You're talking to somebody about cycling and they got a bike, you know, and it's hard work and all that stuff. But that is a great picture of the way that we got to pedal, we got to steer, but that Jesus is going to give us some extra oomph, you know? What a good parable that is. They can remember that, you see. But it only works if they got a bike, or they used to have a bike, or they live at the bottom of a big hill, or something like that. Make it relevant to them and make it relevant to you. I love maps. I love compasses. It's a great picture of the Bible. It's a bit like, if you're feeling a bit lost, you need a compass or a map, don't you? Well, the Bible is like that. I can enthuse on that because I like it. Some of you are cooks. You could enthuse on that. You could enthuse on ingredients. Yeast, and small ingredients making a big difference. You could enthuse on that, because you do it. I couldn't do it. I'm not the foggiest idea what about that. Make it relevant to what you do. Yesterday evening at about 8 o'clock, I was running up the hill from Mousehole to Paul Church, that back hill. Now you're all listening now, particularly because it's a personal thing and it was yesterday and immediately feels a real story, doesn't it? It's not something that Leslie Weatherhead said in 1860, whatever it was. It's me, my story. So you say, it's good to say, I was doing this and this and this and this. And when I was running up the bottom of the hill, I'm a bit tired and I'm pushing whatever I am and I'm thinking, I wonder if I'm going to blow a gasket up here. But at the bottom of the hill, there is a massive, great paramedic ambulance thing with a paramedic tidying up, having sorted somebody else out of his house. There's no crisis, it's lovely. He's sitting around having a chat and everything. And I think as I run past him, I'm okay for the next 200 yards. I just thought that. What a great metaphor, isn't it? That Jesus might actually be just chugging around after you in a big paramedic vehicle in case you get into trouble. Well, what a difference it makes to know somebody's around. It's just there, isn't it? It's a parable. And you could say that. When people say, I feel completely alone, I feel at risk, I feel anxious, You could say, well, I was, running up there, but I was just walking along and I passed this paramedic and I said, just waiting. You do sometimes, I've seen them waiting, don't you? I thought, I feel okay now because it's just there. It's just the same, You just use that as a story. Make it relevant, And then just pick what you want to pick. If you're going to use a parable that Jesus told, you're going to bend it, He's talking to a lot of farmers, so he doesn't tell lots of parables about the sea or about journeys or about mountains. The Jews are not big journeyers. Since the Exodus, they haven't been anywhere, really. It's not that, he says the man went away on a long journey and came back. Didn't know about the story, didn't know about a journey at all. If you're an Etruscan or a Greek or something like this, it's all about journeys, isn't it? So we don't talk about things that really don't work. He talks about agriculture, he talks about farmers, he talks about carpentry, he talks about vines, he talks about grain, he talks all that. So that's where the parable is. And so you think, well, what will be good? Pick the right parable. Read these parables. Have them in your mind. Think about it. Have it ready there. and have the right one ready there. You know, say you want to encourage somebody who's trying you out on a new idea, and saying, I got perhaps a new job, or a moving house, or starting something, or joining something. The parable of the man who built the tower. And because he didn't work out what it was going to cost, he got half of it made and finished with it half made. And everybody laughed at him. That's a strange parable. But it's told when Jesus has been teaching about following him and being prepared to give up everything. And I say to him, that sounds great. God will really help you. Do you think that, do you think you want to give everything to this? Now, like, for instance, if you were going to build a tower, you'd want to think, I'm going to give my all to building this tower. Otherwise, you might finish up with half a tower. So you bent it, the wise man builds his house upon the rock, You don't have to do the sand if you don't want to. Somebody say, I'm really up against it. I've got illness, I've got debt, I've got the family who don't like me, all those sort of things. And you say, well, I know sometimes it looks just like a big storm, but if you got the right foundation. Do you remember when you were in Sunday school, you used to sing The Wise Man Built His House Upon the Rock, and they light up to, oh, I remember that, with the actions, that's right. And you say, well, actually, if we have good foundations, the guy on the rock had just as big a storm as everybody else. So you just bring it in and bend it and move it, and you make it your story. And then you can say, it's not just Jesus' story, it's throw in your own story. When I was at Scarborough for my holidays this year, what are you going to do with that? We went up and down on the donkeys. Well, yeah, all right. But what about if you said something like when somebody was saying, I can't, even if I believed in God, he's far away. If I believe in heaven, I'm nowhere near that. You say, well, I was in Scarborough on my holidays. Scarborough's cut in two halves, isn't it? Down here on the beach with the beach huts and the donkeys and the sea. It's a massive, great cliff. And then there's all the park and the hotels at the top. And you say, but actually, there's a vernacular railway that goes from one to the other. We went up and down on that all the time, Jesus is like that, just bridging over from one to the other. And they say, oh, yeah. And you say, bit like the in Wharfside, where they got the, what's it called? Yeah, the Wharfside now. The escalator, that's right. When it's not broken down. That's good as well, isn't it? You see those just where you're pushing it in. And you can just bring that little story in. And you can bring it in for the abstract things, because Jesus often talks about abstract things. We've sung. Our songs this morning are all about metaphor. The lion and the lamb, the light of the world, the shepherd. All the songs we've sung are about metaphor. They don't work without metaphor, right? And the songs we're going to sing in a minute are all about metaphor. Bring it in. Just be ready for it. A little bit here, a little bit there. And when a conversation comes up about, for instance, I could never be good. I just couldn't be good. We know about the fruit. I am the vine, you are the branches. The fruit of the Spirit. Perhaps they got a pot plant or something in the room. Just bring it over or look at it and say, yeah, I should think about that. It's getting the water out from the bottom. The sap goes up and it produces the flowers or whatever is at the top. That's a really good picture. That Jesus actually, he does new things in us if we'll just put our roots down into the water. What a great picture that is. What you can do at a meal table as well. Say you're on a meal table like this, and you know the thing. You're trying to describe. So what have I got to do to be a Christian? And you say, well, I don't know. So you can do this with 2 cups and saucers, can't you? Right, so you're here and God is there, and there is a real separation of sin here. Is that right? And we've always tried to get to God by being better, and we build this bridge across here, but we don't get it because we're just not up to it. So Jesus loves us, and he built a bridge from the other side on the cross, and he bridges over. Like this is all metaphor. And people are looking at this because you've got 2 cups and saucers, and you've got a knife or whatever it is. They remember that. You draw diagrams on napkins. You bring the salt and the pepper together, and you say, well, we need both of these coming together, don't we? And people remember that. They don't remember you waffling on about this, that, and the other. What about that story of the little boy that you've all heard? But it's so strong, isn't it? Who goes to the seaside and builds himself a sailing boat and makes it all himself and puts the wood and the sails and everything. It's perfect. And he sails it around and he's so proud of it, he's so pleased with it. And then one day this wind takes it and it goes out to sea and he loses it and he's heartbroken, And he goes home and he comes back again later. The next year he's still down about it. And in a second-hand shop in the resort they've gone to, there it is in the window because somebody had found it washed up and it's for sale. And he uses all his pocket money and he uses everything he's got. And he buys it. And he holds it and he says, I made you and I bought you. Oh, it's a great story, isn't it? They're all moved by this, you see. Rather than saying, well, of course, God is a great creator and has subsequently redeemed us after we fell into sin. I can remember the boat. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I could talk to you for 2 hours about what that means. You don't need that. You just need to hear, I am the bread of life. His blood was shed for us. Drink this wine. Hey, you don't need a whole lecture on propitiation. Just drink the wine. It's a metaphor. This is me. This is my body. And try that this week.